I chose a title for this that crypto degens can understand, making the next bull market ecologically regenerative. But I really want to cover topics in both sustainability and Web3, right? So we've done it. So this is the fourth SBS. We've had these going for about a year. We started in Austin, Texas in February, just over a year ago. We then went to EthCC. We went to in Paris. We then went to Bogota and had our third SBS during DevCon, and now we're here. Can you raise your hand if you've been to at least one of these other events before? Awesome. So really a mix of people who have been before and new people. So we're growing the community. I really want to say thank you to all these different groups that we've worked with to make this and other events possible. So firstly, clearly the Filecoin Foundation and Protocol Labs. Thank you so much for the UNFCCC for supporting SBS and for being here today. Thank you for the MIT Energy Club. A bunch of really awesome Web3 and crypto projects. So the Climate Collective, HBAR Foundation, Hedera, Hyphen, Ripple, Blockgreen, Cello, Toucan, and members of the Web3 community in Boston, Boston DAO and ETH Boston, which is going to be happening soon. So please check that out if you are in the city. So after a year, I think it's time to answer this really sort of fundamental question, right? Is SBS meant to be a Web3 conference? Is it meant to be a sustainability conference? This comes up when I talk to people about coming or speaking at SBS, and they say, okay, look, this sounds interesting, but I know stuff about sustainability. I know stuff about renewable energy. I know things about carbon offsets, about corporate governance, but I don't know things about crypto. Or the converse, right? Maybe I know a lot about DeFi, but I haven't spent that much time in sustainability circles. Is this event for me? And the answer is definitely yes. The SBS needs to be yes and, right? It needs to be all of the above, because to do successful work in this space at this intersection requires deep understanding of both of these different sides of the coin, right? Both what does this Web3 technology make possible today that wasn't possible before? And also, there's a ton of knowledge about sustainability, how to set up things like carbon offset markets, how to make corporate claims that people have spent a long time thinking about. Put another way, there are people in this room who have a deep understanding of some of your blind spots. And if you talk to them, your project is more likely to be successful at realigning the economy and the natural worlds. And that is why SBS really aims to be a place where people can come in with a deep understanding of or interest in either of these sides. And it's at that intersection that we hopefully make something truly special. So I want to go over some of the themes that we're gonna focus on today, and that you're gonna hear about in talks both on this stage later today and throughout the day, and also on the stage just one level up, which, as Mark said, is gonna start right after my talk here. One of them is international cooperation and climate change. And so we are hugely grateful, as I said, to have Alex and Godge here from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the UN body tasked with international cooperation around climate change. The IPCC just came out with their AR6 synthesis report, which just made this really clear, right? So the IPCC has been talking for a long time about the increasing scientific consensus around human-caused climate change. And this time they just put it in this big orange box, right? Human activities, principally through emissions of greenhouse gases, have unequivocally caused global warming with about a 1.1 degree temperature increase. So this just serves to focus us all on sort of the urgency there. And we also have Colette, who's a physicist at both Tufts and CERN, who's going to be talking about climate change from a physical perspective. So I also want to highlight how we're working with academia. So like I said, that SBS needs to be both a Web3 conference and a sustainability conference. There is a depth of understanding about the climate crisis and what we can do to counter it in academia, and we want to bring that into the discussion. This was the first SBS that we did tied to a sustainability conference rather than a Web3 conference. So the MIT Energy Conference just happened over the past couple of days. And we're going to have Jason Jay, who leads the MIT Sustainability Initiative here, to do what's called this En-ROADS demo after lunch. It's going to be great. The idea with En-ROADS is that it's an interactive presentation where they have global decarbonization pathways modeled It's going to be on the screen. He's going to ask you, what are you going to do to fight climate change? Are you going to promote afforestation? Are you going to prevent, some amount of methane emissions, right? Methane leakage. He's going to dial that into the model and see, what does that actually mean for global decarbonization pathways? So it's a tool to allow people to get outside of the silo that you normally think in of whatever solution you've done the most work on, and really see what are the space of options available to us as a global community, and how should we focus our efforts? How much of an effect can we have through each of these individual actions that we can take? We're going to talk a lot about how ReFi can support people on the front lines of the climate and biodiversity crisis. Ultimately, if people who are in communities that make them stewards of the natural world, if they need to cut down forests in order to eat, we're screwed from a climate and biodiversity perspective, right? And so one of the ways that Web3 can help is by allowing people to get revenue streams so they can make a living based on protecting the natural world instead of deforesting or degrading it. We have a ton of people who are representing different projects that are aiming to do this from all sorts of different perspectives, right? And this is one of the places where Web3 can make a huge difference in allowing money to go directly to people on the ground in exchange for information about what actions they are taking in order to protect the natural world, or in exchange for just data about, say, forests. And people are gonna cover that from a bunch of different perspectives and a bunch of really amazing projects that people have been working on. We're going to talk about Web3 and renewable energy. I think often carbon offsets get the bulk of attention in regenerative finance or ReFi. There's tons of headlines all the time about carbon offsets. Renewable energy often gets overlooked, but there is a huge amount of potential to use renewable energy both to decarbonize blockchains and also to use Web3 tools in order to track renewable energy. That space is evolving really rapidly. So there's what's called Scope 2 emissions. When you do your emissions account, Scope 2 emissions are emissions due to electricity use. That's distinguished from emissions that you generate directly by burning fuel, and it's distinguished from supply chain emissions. So those are emissions, embodied carbon, say, that's built into products that you purchase. Emissions from electricity fit right in the middle there, and standards for Scope 2 emissions and how they should be accounted for are rapidly evolving. You may have read about this 24/7 tool or carbon-free energy, where people are trying to take renewable energy purchases made with timestamps, right? So you're buying renewable energy, not just that's purchased in this given region this year, right, which is the standard for Scope 2 emissions right now, but you're buying renewable energy that is purchased in this 15-minute period from this particular location. So you know what the grid emissions are associated with energy use at that period, and you're comparing that to, say, solar production or wind production at that period. So this is a really central area where we can use data. We can use verifiable data managed using Web3 tools to make accounting for Scope 2 emissions more effective. We're going to have both a panel on that, and we're going to have a workshop talking about what people are doing and where we need to go, what directions that we should pursue, both to decarbonize blockchains using renewable energy, and also to use blockchains to manage data associated with things like 24/7 renewable energy. We're going to talk a lot about how ESG can drive Web3 and how Web3 can underpin ESG. So environmental, social, and governance has been a huge factor in investment world, driving money into things like carbon offsets and projects that protect the natural world. And so if this is the source of a lot of the investment that goes into the sorts of projects that we're interested in, we want to bring people from the ESG community, right? They have their own conferences just devoted to ESG. They tend not to go to Web3 conferences. So we want to really bring them into the fold and talk about where can the tools that we are building solve problems in ESG, and where can we apply really high quality ESG standards to claims that we make having to do with, say, the sustainability of blockchains. So we're going to have a bunch of different talks that focus on that. We're going to have a panel. We're going to have a fireside chat and really get into the weeds of what's the latest and what's going on with ESG and how can we make a difference. We're going to talk about how Web3 can help carbon markets to evolve in the right direction. There's a ton of projects here that are active in carbon offsets and carbon market space. And obviously, like I said, a lot of headlines coming out about where we can go in carbon offsets. There's been, over the past few months, there's been a ton of drama, which I will not get into now, about how good the additionality claims are underlying carbon offsets. So if you purchase a, say, carbon rainforest offset, did that purchase actually result in the protection of a forest, which presumably is a requirement for you to be able to count it against emissions that you made somewhere else? Or are those additionality claims not as sound as people have assumed them to be? And so we're gonna talk a lot about different tools that we can use in Web3 in order to establish those claims better and really direct capital and direct resources toward projects that are making a difference in protecting the natural world. We're also going to talk about plugging refi into the financial system. So I've mentioned ESG, right? The financial system is how we allocate capital in the modern world, right? This is how we allocate resources toward some projects and not toward other projects. And so we're going to talk about both DeFi, right, which is sort of a bridge between Web3 carbon offset projects and the financial system generally, and how we can essentially plug DeFi into refi, right? How can we build better tools in order to allocate resources toward those types of projects that we care about? We're also going to talk about land and refi. So I think this is another really overlooked topic often in the discussion around regenerative finance. Many of the projects that we work on, many of the projects that we care about, have to do with land use, right? Land use is tied to carbon emissions. It's also tied clearly to biodiversity, right? There is a biodiversity crisis going on that if you look at how people measure the biodiversity crisis, right? There's this framework called the planetary boundaries framework, where they look at different variables that we can measure about the natural world, and they rate the safe zone for those variables. And we're not safe when it comes to carbon emissions, but we're really not safe when it comes to biodiversity loss, right? And that threatens our food systems, that threatens, people come up with these estimates that, 40% of global GDP depends on the natural world, but it should be pretty obvious that 100% of global GDP depends 100% on the natural world, right? So biodiversity loss is a huge challenge, and land use is central to that. So we're going to explicitly talk about land use today. We're also going to have the finale for the SBS hackathon that has been happening over the past 6 weeks. We are super excited about this. There's going to be more than $40,000 in bounties given out to hackathon participants. People have been working on this hackathon virtually over, as I said, the past month and a half or so. It's going to be on the stage at 3:40 later today. We're going to have folks from Climate Collective, HBAR Foundation, and Protocol Labs that put these bounties up. People have done all sorts of really, really amazing work. We tried to build this hackathon in order to let people get really deep into both sustainability and Web3, right? This theme I've been touching on multiple times today. So we structured this with initially a ideation phase where people could meet up with other people who, as I said, had those blind spots that they could fill, right? And come up with really deep substantive projects for these hackathon bounties. So stick around for that. The last thing I wanted to talk about is bringing it back to the title, the newer normal. So the concept of the new normal was an investment thesis in 2009 that a major macroeconomic problem at that point was that capital lacked conviction, and people didn't know what to invest in. They didn't know what to put their money into. And as a result, a lot of money piled up into things like bank accounts, things like money market funds, things that didn't have a huge effect on innovation, things that didn't have a huge effect on what we wanted to see in the real economy and the real world. And what central banks had to do as a result of that was tilt the playing field in favor of risk, right? And there was this long period called the new normal, right, of a bit more than 10 years where central banks did that more and more. That had the effect of washing out distinctions between risky projects that are doing something really useful and risky projects that are just risky and could generate returns, right? We've tilted the playing field back macroeconomically, right? And what that means is that there needs to be a premium for investing in projects that have a lot of conviction, right? So we are moving into a time where there is more uncertainty in general, and the way to succeed in that time period is to give people an option of where to put their money and capital that they can see how you're going to do something good with that, right? So conviction needs to come back to markets. Let's show people that investing in the natural world is the right place to put their resources, right? So let's make the next bull market ecologically regenerative. What can we build now that is going to set up future macroeconomic cycles, and especially ones in crypto, to regenerate the world rather than degrade the world? So let's think more about that. One of the things that we're going to be doing over the next few months in order to try to put money into projects that are active in refi space, we're calling SBS.VC. So this is going to be a virtual demo day where projects that are working in the refi space are going to be pitching to investors who are able to, who are interested in investing in this space, right? So if you are interested in participating, if you are either an investor or if you are a project that's looking to raise money sometime during this year, please go to sbs.vc. You can fill out forms there, get more information about the demo day. We're really excited to do this virtual demo day where we're going to just try to drive as much capital as we can into projects that are setting us up to regenerate the world in the next crypto bull run. So as I said, we've had a year of SBS. Thank you all for coming. We've gone to 4 amazing cities on 3 different continents. You might ask, where next? So where are we going in the next SBS? And the answer is everywhere. It is with great pleasure that I announce SBS Earth, which is going to be a global festival of refi. So the next SBS is going to be a fully virtual event. We want to bring people out of the cities that we have had these events in typically and bring them to the actual projects that are having a real effect on the world. So we want to film in these locations where refi projects are happening. We want to have conversations across international boundaries. And please stay tuned and go to sbs.tech if you would like more information about that coming soon. Thank you so much, and welcome to SBS Boston.